Hello and welcome to this discussion about Aggie, a new documentary about the philanthropist and art collector Agnes Aggie Gund. Here we have Kat Gund, the filmmaker, who also happens to be Aggie's daughter. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You know what? Let me start that over. Is that okay, Mary? Because actually, I need to call her Catherine.
You can say either. I knew you were going to be panicked.
Okay.
That really doesn't matter.
Okay.
We can cut this out. Don't worry.
Great. So let me just say that one more time.
Okay.
Okay. Hello and welcome to this discussion about Aggie, a new documentary about the philanthropist and art collector Agnes Aggie Gund. Joining us, we have Catherine Gund, the filmmaker, who also happens to be Aggie's daughter. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You have made previous documentaries about fascinating people. Two examples are you made a documentary about the singer Che Vila Vargas and the choreographer Elizabeth Streb. I'm interested to know how you decided to make a film about your mother.
Yeah, my subjects always just come to me. I never go looking for them. And I knew Elizabeth and I'm friends with Elizabeth. And she was off to do this incredible performance around the time of the Olympics in London. And she had her dancers hanging off the London Eye and jumping off the Millennium Bridge. And I thought, well, that's worth sort of making a movie about. And then you have to go back and see how did she become that person who would do such a thing. And then with Chavela, I had met her when I was in Mexico, and she was 70 years old, this badass ranchera singer, lesbian. And we thought sort of she's older, and I had a camera, a big clunky camera. Nobody had them on their phones at the time. And my friend said, we better hurry up and record with her. And she went on to become this international superstar. She lived for another 20 plus years, performing all over the world. And then I found that footage later, and I thought, we can put this together and really tell a story about bravery and about the sort of phoenix rising from the ashes. And then I thought I would never, ever, ever make a movie about my mother. It's the last thing I would recommend anybody ever do. But she did this amazing thing, which was that she sold one of her prized paintings with the intention of ending mass incarceration. She sold it to raise money to start a fund that would immediately disperse $100 million to the fight to end mass incarceration by investing in artists and activists and organizers who are primarily working together to change the narrative and change the policy. And once she did that incredible thing, I thought, okay, I'd like to make a film about that. And then we have to kind of scroll back, unspool, and figure out how did this person become someone who could do such a thing.
Right. Early in the film, she says that she hopes very few people see the movie.
She hopes no one sees it.
Or no one sees it. It's a very funny moment. I'm wondering, did you have to work to overcome her hesitation?
I did, and it was sort of the central challenge of making this film was that on the one hand, I had to tell her she was worth making a movie about, but yet part of the reason she is because of her deep humility and how much she eschews the spotlight and is always trying to learn from other people and focus on what other people are doing. And she's just a very, she does not want to have the camera on her ever. And that's part of what makes her story interesting to me. So it was hard then to insist that I turn the camera on her. And those moments, that was one of many moments in the back of the car, which is when I'd be alone with her. And I just took my cell phone out and asked her questions. If you stay till the very end past the credits, there's another little moment that comes up and I say, well, now what do you think of the film? And she said, the film is great. What film? That's the story of making this film, is that there was just never sort of a understanding or a focus on the fact that it was going to be about her. I have to say that she has been asked several times since the film has been released about whether she still doesn't want anyone to see it. And now she usually says, well, no one will want to see it because it's about me. But I do think that Catherine wants to help end mass incarceration. And if this film is going to do that, then people should see it. So
Wow.
that makes it worthwhile for me.
Yeah, there's this heartbreaking moment where she talks about her father and whether he would be proud of the accomplishments that she's made during her life. And she says she thinks he would rather it were one of her brothers. So I was just wondering, did you meet your grandfather, who's also the person from whom she inherited her wealth? Did you know him?
He was much older than she was. He was an older father. And her mother, although not as old as her father, was also older for our times, at least.
Right.
And I knew him. He died when I was 2.5. So you have photographs of him holding me, but I never knew him. I know a lot of stories about him, and I do try to understand the dynamics of the time, how he was a person of his time, in the same way that I was so curious about how Chavella was a woman of her time. She didn't identify until she was much older as a lesbian, even though she always loved women, was attracted to women, was having sex with women. It wasn't of her time. By the end, when there was an international movement for lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender rights, she was able to feel positive about that identity. And I feel like, you know, with my mother, it's really been fascinating as a daughter and as she being a mentor of mine, to be able to look and see someone who can change and grow and evolve with the times. And I feel like that's kind of the story, certainly the story about race that we put in this film, which is her coming to an identity and understanding that whiteness is a privileged position, that whiteness is a race, that whiteness is what creates blackness, therefore creates racism. The role that white people have in fighting anti-Black racism, I think that's been an evolution, and I tried to demonstrate that in the film.
Right, and seeing the 2006 documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay is portrayed as a turning point. Were you with her at that screening?
I wasn't actually with her at that screening, but I was aware that she was going, and I spoke with her soon after. It's an incredible thing as a filmmaker to see a film have that big an effect on someone, because that's what you always hope for. It's interesting to me that it was art, because my mother is notoriously open and empathetic, open to the messages of art, to the joy, to the learning, to the transformative power. And this was another example of an art piece, like the books or the art pieces that she has supported through the Art for Justice Fund, that was really able to kind of, I call it like her tipping point. It's not that she learned for the first time that the prison system was racist. It's not for the first time that she learned it was inhumane, or that it was founded on violence and punishment and sort of dehumanizing definition of criminal. But it was a time when it put together a lot of those pieces for her, and did it in such a way that it also changed her heart at the same time that it was educating her. And she left, couldn't sleep that night, and called her friend Darren Walker, who runs the Ford Foundation, the next day and said, I just am not doing everything I can. What else can I do? And I hope that that's another message from the film that comes through, which is that no matter who we are or where we are, what we're capable of, or what resources we have, or what our past experiences are, we can do something. We can do more. We can participate more fully in the work of creating justice in our society.
And how long after she saw the film did she sell the Liechtenstein?
Well, in essence, I would say she sold it the next day. It takes a while to do it, and she had to figure that out. But it was in her conversation with Darren that she decided, you know, this was this art piece she'd had for 40 years over the mantle. It had been up for 40 years. She was friends with the painter. She remains friends with his widow, Dorothy Liechtenstein. And she's not in the business of selling paintings to make money. I think that was part of what I think is magical about Art for Justice, is that alchemy of turning this art into justice. That there are a lot of collectors who give money, and there's people who sell their paintings, but there was the intention behind it, which I feel was very different, that it was, I'm selling this and we're going to use the proceeds to support this movement. I thought it was, you know, it was just kind of a moment, I think, where she also realized that she'd been giving artworks to museums so that the art would be more accessible to more people, and she still does that. But she had never really sold a piece to make this kind of money, turned a painting into money. And it turned out that this painting sold for the 15th highest amount of any painting ever.
Wow.
So it was an enormous amount of money, and a big step for her, because she's had paintings that are valuable to that degree, but she's given them to museums because she believes that everyone should be able to see them. And she did know when she sold this to a private collector that she would most likely never see this painting again. And
Right.
so that was a sacrifice for her to do that. And it was a lesson for me to see that you can try other things, you can do other things, that, you know, when we get in touch with our agency, which she demonstrates throughout the film, throughout her growth, is like when you realize you don't have to do things a certain way just because other people do or the mainstream media tells you to, or that you can use your imagination to try something bigger and different than you've ever thought of before. I think that kind of freedom, really, that imagination offers you is something she's availed herself of.
Right. The movie it feels very personal. It has interviews with some of Aggie's grandchildren, which I thought was very sweet, though I didn't realize immediately they were her grandchildren. But there's also world-class artists. John Waters is probably the most famous person. Why did you decide to structure the movie that way, with family and celebrity side by side?
Well, that's interesting, because originally I wasn't making a movie. I was doing an archive project. I'm fascinated by archives, and my mother's getting older, and I realized that because she issues the camera, that there isn't really footage of her, and that she has these fascinating conversations with me and others. And I asked her if I could just record a few conversations between her and me. She said yes, which was shocking. But then we did one and it was awful. And we were both very stiff and uncomfortable and boring. And I just thought, well, that doesn't work. So then I decided she has these great conversations with my 4 children. So I started filming those just as a way to get her on tape. I didn't have a goal. I didn't care what she talked about. The kids were each, I just asked them to talk to her for an hour. They could write out questions, and they each sort of chose different. One chose, you know, capital P politics, like electoral politics, and one chose love and relationship, and one chose traveling and food and spirituality, and one chose art and influences in art for justice. And they just started talking about these things with her, and I thought, oh, that's how I could get these sort of archival videos. I could just do them. I wasn't looking to the film. And so she named a couple people and said, how about I talk to so-and-so? And because these are all friends of hers that are in the film, friends or family. Some people she's known a long, long time. And we actually, about a third to a half of the interviews, we did about 35. I would say maybe almost half of them aren't even in the film. So we have these little, someday maybe a short film, but they lent themselves to the whole culture, the whole feeling of the film. And so after we'd done 5 or 6 or 8 of them, I was like, oh, we really should make a movie. And it made so much more sense that she could speak that way and that I represent it that way, because she is about her relationships and she learns from people. And her collecting of art, she told me once that she collects contemporary art because she wants to know the artist. So why would she collect a piece of art where she can't get to know the artist? And so it's in that way that I know that her relationships and that's what feeds her. And so they were much more interesting than a talking head interview.
Right. And I noticed Jason Moran did the score. I mean, she's very connected.
Yeah, that was a wonderful connection, because also he had done the score for 13th, and
right.
Nice resonance there, and he was a dream to work with. He's so talented and he's so creative, and he has a way of really piercing into an arc or an emotion, and kind of not only resonating, but not just reflecting, but also building it up. So it was really amazing to work with him on that. And another beautiful, talented musician is Samora Pinderhughes, who wrote the theme song, Into the Unknown. And we just finished a little music video of the theme song, which we'll be releasing next week or the week after, I don't know. But it's a beautiful about imagination and how we can really address Ava DuVernay's quote at the beginning of the film, where I had asked her what was the relationship between art and justice, and she said they're the same thing. They're both about seeing something that's not there and believing it can be, and then working to make it so.
So
and
did
that
you
really makes every artist, every activist an artist. It is true. Sorry.
No, that's okay. What you had to say was much more interesting. Did you grow up with world-class artists coming in and out of your home? What was your relationship to art as a child?
We didn't live in New York City when I was smaller. She moved here once I had started high school, in the middle of high school, and she came. We were always, she was involved with a lot of artists, and by the time she got to New York City, I would say she was around a lot of fascinating people, and it made me and her very connected, especially because that was, as soon as I started college, was when the AIDS crisis started raging, and she was very close to Robert Mapplethorpe and to Scott Burton and to a lot of artists. So she had experience and wasn't surprised by queerness, and just felt, that was just a part of the fabric of her world and her life. And I feel like art allowed her that, and so it allowed me to see that I could be any way I wanted. I could grow how I wanted. I could try out the ideas I had. I didn't have to have the same ideas as her, and she would still want to engage and love, and as she did with her artist friends. So I think their celebrity was never very, foregrounded. In fact, she's hilarious about celebrities because she doesn't know who any of them are. And she does get seated by them now and again and asks them, famous actors and things, ask them what they do. Hilarious stories about that. So celebrity wasn't the issue, but I knew that I was around the smartest, most creative, most inspiring people, because they, even now in quarantine, it's other artists that I, who are most of my friends anyway, but who I turn to about how to get through right now, how to make sense of this time right now, how to find healing in this moment, but also how to sort of nurture ourselves enough to move forward, and also to make sure that we all find moments of joy in this very difficult time.
And I wanted to ask, how is Aggie doing during this time?
That's a very sweet question. Thank you for asking. I would say it's related to what I said earlier about her really being a people person, and that it's very hard for her to be so isolated. And, she's a people person, an extrovert, and a real doer. And she was someone who in New York City, I couldn't keep up. When I started making the movie, I was just like, I had no idea, because I stayed home and took care of my kids at night. And once in a while, for a best friend would go to their opening or their concert or whatever, but I wasn't doing this cocktail party opening, gala, support, salon, book celebration, whatever. But she had like 3 of those a night, literally. Right. And she would go and go. And so she would see 200 people, 100 to 200 people every single day. And so the first few months of quarantine, it was just my children and me with her. And I would say it was excruciating. I think we're all settling into a different time now. She's able to see some people, but it's disconcerting. It's distracting. I think, we're all having this experience of loss of so many different kinds of things. First and foremost, the the loss of life. And over 200,000 people have been killed by this administration's willful turning away from this crisis. And, and then she's also of an age where people she knows are passing a lot often. And she is used to being able to, like we all are, to having a grief process and to going to memorials. And she's generously and beautifully speaks at memorials because she really loves people so deeply. And I mean, even our recent whole country's loss of the Justice Ginsburg, that was someone who's a similar age to Aggie, and she made an award just in February, her inaugural Women in Leadership Award, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Award, and she gave it to Aggie. And so one of the last things that she did was this event, very fancy. My boys all had to rent tuxes to go. It was a very fancy event, but it was so moving to be near such a giant. And so I think the loss, I think for our elders, they're experiencing loss anyway. To me, it reminds me of the AIDS crisis, because she just kept, holding me and saying, you're not supposed to lose so many people when you're 25. That's for later. And I have reminded her of that when I've tried to give her some solace in these last couple of years, when so many of her friends and colleagues are passing. So the answer is, it's a difficult time.
Yeah.
I think that she's very lucky. She's been very lucky in her health and the health of her immediate family. She has, my sisters have been around with her and their children to make sure they see her. So she hasn't been as isolated as some of the people who've had to stay in the nursing homes and places like that, who haven't been able, or in hospitals, who can't be visited and nobody can be with them when they're sick or even when they're passing. Sick and recovering. To do that alone is horrible. So it's a combination, which I imagine is true for all of us.
Right. And has Aggie or the Art for Justice Fund done anything differently since George Floyd was killed?
So that's a great question. I mean, what makes me feel really good about the Art for Justice Fund is that we didn't really have to pivot at all, because we were already, that's what our fight was about, recognizing the direct line from slavery to the prison industrial complex, which goes right through the police movement, recognizing that to enforce this kind of anti-Black racism has been violence, and that was used during the time of slavery and right straight through. The kind of isolation and violence and culture of punishment that is reflected in our criminal justice system is something that we're clearly and explicitly fighting against. So we're redoubling down on supporting our artists and our advocates, and we have actually moved a little more money sooner. It's already a 5-year spend down, but we've got some great partners, including now many artists who have donated works and money. So we had even more than the 100 million. We were looking to save 20 million for a 6th year, but we're using some of that immediately to make sure that we can support people in the work. And I had the honor of getting to talk with Patrisse Cullors today, who's one of our founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she reminded this group of people that, when people get like off put by this notion of defund the police and that it's too radical. She said, it was only a few years ago when the words Black Lives Matter was considered too radical. And that's the narrative change that artists like Patrisse, who's both an artist and an advocate as well, are really succeeding at, is that now we're in this moment when people, Black Lives Matter, everybody says and understands, or if they can't, there's someone around them that can explain why all lives matter. It doesn't make sense. And we're going to get there with defund the police. And I think that abolition is a mindset. It's a place to go. It's an evolution. And we can, like Ava said, imagine it and work towards it, even if we know it's not true today. That's the saddest thing about what she said when she said you have to imagine justice. reminds you that it's not here yet. So I think we've been able to focus on some of that, but I think that idea of the narrative change, the fact that white people who aren't white nationalists are speaking up about race and fighting anti-Black racism and talking about their roles and responsibilities and educating themselves at such a huge scale is an enormous change since the murder of George Floyd and also Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. I mean, so we know the names. Ava's been working on making sure we also know the names of the murderers, of the police that are killing people, because often, in addition to their immunity and getting off, they also don't even get called out in a public forum. And we need to change that if we're going to change this narrative. So we've been active. I think Aggie's been very involved in trying to help get the vote out. You know, that's not something Art for Justice does. We're nonpartisan. But Aggie, you asked about her as well. And I would say it's not a change, but I think there's a redoubling, a renewed focus, a renewed energy behind. She was one of the people who implored all 4 of my children to be poll watchers and election workers. So they're all registered to do that. So I think we're at a time when if you're not really, really busy, you're under a rock.
Yeah. Well, I want to take us out on a lighter note.
Okay.
So here in Massachusetts, we're so proud of our museums. And I wanted to ask if you and Aggie have favorite museums in the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I know she does. She has a million museums. The Museum of Fine Arts, my aunt, has been a huge supporter of that museum. They live in Cambridge and she's been on the board. I know that Mass MoCA is doing some incredible things, including reimagining what the site of peace can be, where there's been an architecture of pain and punishment in the prisons. And he's been working hard to get communities to reimagine those spaces so that they don't remain these dungeons of punishment. So I would say that is one. I have one son who goes to Amherst. So I think they have 2 very cool museums. There's a lot of museums. I hope I'm saying the one that you love. Which one is your favorite?
Mass MoCA.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, they're doing it. They do incredible things. I mean, I feel for the museums right now. I know they're a place that we can come together, just like places of religious observance where people aren't able to gather right now. And those are the kinds of places that really help us through in moments like this. I think people who can now get on these, you know, they allow just 30 people into a museum at a given time or something like that. I do hope that people are able to go and have a moment almost like it's a temple so that they can reflect on what's happening in the world right now, what's happening in our country, what's happening to our democracy and to our people, and try to sort of get some nurture, get fed in these museums and get some of their spiritual needs satisfied.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your film. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who has joined us for this conversation.
Thank you for watching the film. Thank you for doing the interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.